And we are back here once again with another episode of the MSK show, and I will be doing another segment of having a conversation with X person, and the person that I will be having a conversation with today is Herman Hunter, and this is going to be episode 26 of the MSK show. So we are on our way to hitting 100 episodes, or will I pull a Marvel Comics route and reboot back to a number one if there's low views? Never know, honestly, man. So, what's going on, man? How are you doing?
If we're going Marvel, I'm not turning gay. Sorry.
God, man. At a certain point, I've rebooted so many times. It's either I'm DC or it's either I'm Marvel. But yeah. Marvel just always does this. It's recently it's been Scarlet Witch. Scarlet Witch always get to a number 10, back to a number 1. Or if it doesn't go well, then they'll pair her with Quicksilver, 10 issues, back to number 1. They don't know what they want to do with that broad. And, it's one of those things where I think movies have basically tricked them into something that I always talk about a lot. And people disagree with me, even though it's always, I'm not even saying certain things because I'm just saying them. People don't understand. I try to look at the most casual point of view and then try to apply it to some, like, I would say, main core points of views, because what the MCU movies did with certain characters' popularity is that it shot mostly the actors' popularity up with the character they're playing rather than the comic book character, actually. So, like, how many people, if you were to ask, because they like the MCU movies, like Iron Man because they like him from the comic books, or do they like him because Robert Downey Jr. is playing them or him, right? That's why the same thing I brought up with the Black Widow movie. It's like, well, there's a good chance the reason why it failed is because, well, is Scarlett Johansson as interesting on her own as Black Widow by herself with no one else around her? The problem,
I think it's half and half. I mean, the guys who showed up to the guys who initially showed up to Iron Man were the fans, and when people found out that it was a good movie, then the normies showed up, and that's the reason why you make movies is you do it. You make them so you can draw those fans to your movie. And if the movie's good, they'll talk about it, and then normal people will show up. Because at that point, Robert Downey Jr. he wasn't as big as he is now. That first movie in that series that shot him into the A++,
Yeah, because before that, I remember he had Tropic Thunder that I haven't seen a full movie. I remember I saw it parts, but at a friend's house. And then he was also very big in the Sherlock Holmes movies, actually.
Yeah.
Because after Endgame, people always don't remember this because they always, what people do, dude? They always like to remember the good shit, but anytime something bad happens, they're like, no, sweep it on the rug. Guys, literally after Avengers Endgame, which was the highest grossing superhero movie ever, it's never getting trumped at this point in time, probably. Almost, at least until we're dead, probably. Yeah. When they make a Avengers versus DC movie or some bullshit like that. He made a movie with RDJ came out called Doolittle and bombed. Yeah. Completely. Actually just made no money, Yep. So is he the star that people like, or do they like him playing Iron Man? That's the big difference, honestly, now.
And it was a perfect, I mean, those first three characters, Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, it was a combination of the proper casting and the right character. And of course, they also tried to stick to, whatever the lore was, as far as those characters went. And that brought in the fans, because, the fans going to want to see their favorite characters in, or some of their favorite comics and the favorite characters in a movie. That's what happened with the Lord of the Rings series. They stuck to the Lord of the Rings books as closely as they could, and they found people that were not only good at what they did, but also paired them up to the right character, and that's the reason why all that stuff worked.
Because it's crazy, man. It's like we just want to have conversation with the panelists, and I know you told me you watch. It's what I try to get people to understand is like kind of like when we talk about girls, like you take a girl out and. Like you take them out for a good dinner, you take them out for a good time. Does she really like you for you, or does she like what you're doing for her? It sounds like to me, people liked what the actors were doing in the movies rather than like the characters actually themselves sometimes.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. It could be like, I love RDJ playing Iron Man so much, I can't see him doing anything else after that. Because
exactly.
they tried. There were rumors they were actually just going to recast him with Tom Cruise. I'm like, and fans were like, I don't want Tom Cruise. You don't want Tom Cruise as Iron Man. That is basically just about as good as him in almost some regards. So you don't want Tom Cruise as Iron Man? That's crazy to think about.
No, yeah, because I mean he nailed the role.
Yeah,
and it's just like Chris I forget his name,
Chris
but the
Evans.
guy Chris, he nailed freaking Captain America. I mean, dead on, nailed the character, nailed the part. What's his name? Nailed Thor. And even Scarlett Johansson, I think she nailed Black Widow. But I think the problem with the Black Widow movie is that after you had Endgame, where do you go from there? And if they would have put it in earlier, before Endgame, I think it would have fared better. She's a Scarlett Johansson's a very good actress. It is a very good character. I mean, there's a lot of depth there to Black Widow. And and they were remiss in doing the movie when it was, they were actually remiss in striking while the iron was hot. And then it was an afterthought. And so in some ways, when she complains about it, she kind of got screwed.
I was fully agree with her. Yeah. I did. Bob Chapek screwed her. And I remember like after her lawsuit, because that went away really quickly. No one even remembers anymore. Remember when as you just said, she was going to sue them. And then he said something publicly about maybe we kind of do need to change like certain ways we pay certain actors based off like streaming and theatrical box office. He, not even kidding, guys. That's literally what he had basically said, almost word for word. And then magically, the lawsuit is gone. They probably Scarlett, Virgil, here's $3 million. Just shut up and stop talking. I guarantee you, they probably just gave her some money. She just
probably did.
It probably was, that check was probably so big because she's never mentioned it any more since then. That check was so big. She was like, you know what? Yeah, fuck Black Widow. I'm got paid.
And I mean, she's an A-list actor. She was an A-list actor before she walked into that role. So it's not like,
for sure, yeah.
She brought star power to that role. So that's like, she's kind of like Samuel L. Jackson, A-list actor before he walked into that.
Ryan Reynolds has that too. Like people like Ryan Reynolds, not even just because he's Deadpool. They like him because he's been in so many movies that he likes. He's even liked for Green Lantern, even though that movie, a steaming pile of shit.
I know. I got about 5 minutes into that. I'm like, nah.
My brother watched that one day at the movie theater with me when I watched Transformers: Dark of the Moon. Let's just say our taste in movies back then were just explosions. The Michael Bay syndrome got us. But since this is your first time here, let's start at the beginning with your origin story. How was your life growing up, man?
Well, actually, it was pretty good until I hit school.
Okay.
Then it went right into.
You just super bullied or something?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a combination of things. My parents were florists, and back then it was the 70s. That was around the time of the latchkey kid. And so, when you go home and you're alone and you're supposed to be doing homework and you suck at school, you don't do homework. So I did terrible in school. And then bullying came up and all the other things that went along with that. I gained a lot of weight. I was very heavy. That pretty much came off in high school. But yeah, so I kind of got out of high school, barely out of high school. Went into electronics, which I was told in high school that you could never get into I would never be able to get into electronics because my math was horrible. Just like I'd probably never be a writer because my writing, my English was horrible. And I actually excelled at it, and that eventually, at one point, because I had kind of a brief career there, got into software, and that's where I've been pretty much for the last 32. 3 years, somewhere in that area. So, I mean, I got like 3 decades worth of experience writing software in some pretty big places, which some of them I can't really talk about. Somewhere in that career, I started writing articles for, and at that time, which was a well-known software development journal. And that I actually managed to sort of parlay into a book. Actually, they contacted me. And so I wrote a book. It took about a year to do, and the book was an absolute failure. But we found royalty reports. We were cleaning out this area here because we're refurbishing this. This is going to be my work office.
Or man cave,
And
as they call them.
yeah, and my wife came across one of my old royalty reports, and come to find out, I sold 900 copies of that book, and that was a failure.
That's crazy. Think
Yeah.
about.
So
Damn.
I mean, they give you an advance, and I forget how much I got. It was in the thousands. It was four digits. I know that. And you know, you have to make up. You have to make up all those sales before you get royalties off of it. And well, that never happened. But I mean, I sold 900 copies, so that's actually pretty good. So I decided I can either write software. I can either continue to write about software and chase after software, or I can just chase after software and write software. And frankly speaking, I think writing software is probably way more lucrative. So I sort of passed on. I sort of passed on continuing to write software stuff, and I decided I was going to write fantasy. So I started writing some stuff, and it was absolutely awful. But you know,
Do
I
you
was
remember it? You
oh
remember
yeah,
your first inspiration for it?
yeah. And so I came up with an idea for a book, and I wrote it,
Yeah.
and it was very clear in my head, and what I wanted to do was about a character named Frankie, who was actually transported into a fantasy world, and he was like the promised one. He was going to come there to save the world, and the book sucked. I mean, it just sucked. But you know, and my wife read it, and she was kind of like, "Yeah, it's you know, it's okay," which was wife speak for it sucked. And so, taking that, I decided I was going to go get it professionally published. Now, all this stuff is back before there was even anything like self-publishing. You couldn't get published unless you, excuse me,
You're fine.
either printed it yourself, which virtually nobody did, or you went to a publisher, or you went to an agent who went to a publisher. Those are the only three ways.
Yeah, I heard even in comic books, as you know, agents were like the middleman that got you to the big person. They got you to the big boss.
Yeah. So after that, so I tried, and I think I accumulated something like 80 rejections. And one person came back and said, "There's a story here, but you're gonna have to rewrite this entire thing because you need to take this out and do this, this, and this."
Yeah.
And I was like, I had spent about a year at that point, and I'm like, I can't do this.
So even
And
back then, you're saying that they even wanted you to basically, condense and edit your work to the way they wanted to, based off the way that they thought they could market your book, actually.
well, no, it was just bad writing. It was
Okay.
horrible writing. I looked at
Okay.
it. I've actually rewritten that book already, and
Okay.
I could tell exactly why it was bad.
Maybe they were onto something there.
Yeah. So, but I'm like, I can't do this. So I put it away, and I figured, I got kids. I I maybe I should just concentrate on my career, which it did, and probably the best thing because it that career now funds what I'm doing now. But it's somewhere I think that was around 2005, 2006 if that happened. And then somewhere in 2017, I think it was, I got the itch to start writing again.
Mm.
So there was this book that I tried publishing back in like 2005. This was actually going to be like a trilogy. This is going to be my Lord of the Rings. And I thank God that I really do. I thank God it never got published. Um, but there was a romance that was started but never really explored. So I wrote the book that explored that romance, and that was the final book of that series. And of course, that's horrible too. But for some reason, I was just like, I was like driven to write it. And if I ever published it again, it would get rewritten again because it sucks. But that got me to thinking. Well, why don't I go back and rewrite the Frankie story, the story about this guy named Frankie? And so I started, and I went in and I started rewriting it, and I gave my wife what I thought was going to be the first book, and she read it this time, and she goes, "This is as good as any other book that I've ever bought. Matter of fact, this is really good. You should try and get this published."
And it wasn't that wife bias because she's married to you. She
No,
has to say that.
no,
Okay. Because your wife
because
would like say it's shit if it's shit, right?
yeah, because I mean, if we self-publish, if I self-publish, we're paying for it, and she's the one that does all the bills. So if it sucks, it's not going to happen.
It's crazy how people look to the significant other or the family
Yeah,
members for like, hey, this is like my moral compass. No, your wife would literally say your book is actual
yeah,
shit.
yeah.
That's
Your book is
crazy.
shit. She didn't want to tell me that earlier, but now that we're older, and the kids are grown and all that other stuff, she's willing to tell me this stuff sucks. Um, but she's also my main beta reader, and
Yeah.
she's kind of my target audience. I mean, she likes Steven Seagal movies.
Mhm.
She's big action adventure junkie. She's a big reader. Bunch of those books behind me are they're hers.
Mhm.
And she just had paperbacks and stacks of paperbacks that she used to read. So she knows, and she has her authors like Dean Koontz and all this other stuff. So she knows what good books are like. And so I decided at that point, okay, well, I'm going to try and get this thing published, even though I kind of knew because I had been investigating publishing at that point. I kind of knew what my chances were, and they were like next to none.
Mhm.
And so, but the thing is, if you don't do it, the people are always going to say, you know, how do you know that you wouldn't be able to get published unless you tried? So I did. And I basically gave up, I think, about 2.5 years trying to get published. Um, Somewhere in the midst of that 2.5 years, I started getting kind of queasy about going with traditional publishers, in addition to the fact that I was receiving nothing but rejection after rejection after
Mhm.
rejection. So what I did is I started looking at marketing and things I need to do to self-publish. And I decided, well, if I'm going to self-publish, if this is going to end up being self-publish, then I better start getting some ducks lined up in a row. Sometime during then, somebody said they wanted to actually read the book. So I sent out my full manuscript to an agent, and it was an experienced agent. The person had been in that industry for at least 20 years. Then at some point, I got thrown into the hospital for COVID. It was bad. If I didn't go into the hospital, I probably would have been dead. So it was around that time too. Um, and then I got the response back after I got out of the hospital, which is I think later in March, and they basically said, they gave me the standard rejection, but she said at the very end, "You are very talented," and I kind of knew what that meant. It meant it's a good book, but we can't sell it. So at that point, even though I was going through smaller publishers, at that point I decided we're going to be self-publishing. Matter of fact, at one point I was thinking about just giving it all up, and my wife said, "You're a good writer. We'll find the money. We'll publish."
How do you navigate through that? Because there are people that even do like content creation that have that thought in the back of their head, like, what if I just don't do this at all? Even me myself, when I had like really bad depressing days, I'd have those thoughts too. How do you navigate through those?
Um, I've had 30 years of when you've been in like in a corporate job for 30 years, you
Yeah.
learn to live with depression. And it's a matter, you could just say to yourself, I got kids I got to feed, I got a mortgage that needs to be paid, I got to get up and I got to get up and I got to go into work, and I just suck it up. And so that's what I did. I wrote hang on, the manuscript for this guy, The Revenant in the Tomb. Let's see if I can get that. Yeah, The Revenant in the Tomb. And this was supposed to be some marketing ploy. It was a free giveaway. Um, I was actually in the process of writing this guy, The Wizard Stone. See if I can get there without the glare.
Mhm.
Uh, I was in the process of writing that guy, stopped and started writing The Revenant in the Tomb. That was going to be my free giveaway, because you when you get into self-publishing, you do a bunch of research, and of course you find all these marketing things. This is what you need to do, and
Mhm.
these are some marketing ideas. One of the marketing ideas is universal: is write something that you can give away to get people attracted to.
And what do people like more than anything? Free stuff.
Mhm.
Because if you give someone something free, they might actually be inclined to buy something. It's one of the oldest tricks in the books, which is not a
Yeah.
bad one.
Well, it spectacularly did not work at all.
You just had a string of bad luck, don't
Yeah.
you? Holy
Oh yeah.
shit.
I mean, it was an absolute frickin' failure. But the funny part is that going back before I tried,
Mhm.
putting it out there, I gave the manuscript to my wife, and I she'd also read parts of the other book as well. But I gave the manuscript to The Revenant and the Tomb to my wife, and she read it. And one day I came out there after she had gotten done reading it, and I asked, or I said, "Did you finish it?" She goes, "Yeah."
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Oh, that doesn't sound good." I said, "So, what did you think?" And she just kind of said, "So you're giving this away?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "O- okay." So her whole point was, oh, and actually, she did say it. If I remember correctly, she goes, "You should probably give the other book away and sell this one." So I said, "Well, I did say I'm going to be giving away a book and trying it, and so I got to keep my word." And at some point, I was like, I got about a month or two into the whole giveaway. Give me your email address and I'll give you a free book. And it's like, well, maybe this is not working. Maybe I should just frickin' publish it. So I did. I went and I got the thing formatted. I got the cover made, and I put it out on Amazon. And that first year, I sold about 220 copies. Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
What year was that?
That was 22.
2022. Okay,
Yeah,
so this is
2022.
recent. Okay. So you've been going through all of this author stuff, writing and everything for years and years. And
Yep.
was that your first fully published book, or that
Yep.
was
Well, that was my first fully published fiction. I'm
okay.
actually traditionally published with the other book that didn't sell well, but sold
Okay.
900 copies. So yeah, so that's fully published fiction. Then after I produced the book, I was talking to my wife and said, "Hey, and actually I was drunk when I said it, and I said, how about we do an audio book?" She's like, "Yeah, sure." So we went out and we did an audio book, and I found a narrator named Steve Fortune. He's a Brit, and he uh, he was just trying to get into the industry, the audiobook narration and the voiceover narration. So I picked him up and I put out an audiobook, and probably that guy is as good as any of those professional narrators, probably by a factor of two. He's an actor. He's a professional actor, and so he does a fantastic audio narration. And all the reviews that I've gotten back on the book, they may think my writing sucks, but they think he does a great freaking job. As a matter of fact, somebody actually wrote that in a review
Mhm.
that was on the Wizard Stone. So anyway, so I put out I put out the Revenant and the Tomb, and I did a bunch of paid ads and whatnot. And it didn't sell real well, but apparently most authors when they release a book sell maybe about a dozen, 2 dozen copies. Well, I sold far more than that.
Mhm.
And then I put out the Wizard Stone the year after, because I was working on that while I was doing the Revenant and the Tomb, and that one that sold the same amount of copies as the Revenant and the Tomb in a matter of 2 months. So we were past the 220 mark in 2 months, and I
Wow.
think I think I doubled the number of copies within 6 months. So
So after the big published book you did on Amazon back in 2022, you eventually got another one published and you ended up doing better numbers. So
yep,
for anyone that's
this guy.
currently okay, so anyone that's currently with you right now, how many books do you have out in your catalog?
I have three books. I
Okay, you're
have
working
the
on a fourth
Revenant.
one.
Yeah, I'm working on the fourth one right now.
Okay,
Fourth one's actually already written, and
okay,
I'm just finishing off the edits, and we go start audiobook production
awesome.
November.
Mhm,
The third book that came out, and actually the fourth book is the second part of this, was The Revenant and the Cult.
mhm.
So, and that was done. This got released this year, and that was this guy came about as a result of as a result of the feedback I got on the first one. People love the Revenant and the Tomb so much. I literally had people coming up to me on social media and saying, when you going to do another book about this character and all this other stuff?" And originally, the character in the Revenant and the Tomb, this guy named Hal Cedric, he was supposed to just be a throwaway character. He was, like I said, it was a free giveaway. So I made
Yeah,
a
yeah.
character up, and he's got his friends, and they go out and they do whatever they do,
That's like
and it
the
was just
that's like usually the best selling stories. I just made
yeah,
it up randomly because I just didn't care. It's the one that you
bingo.
barely cared about. This is the one that people liked. That's so weird.
And so I put it out. Next thing I know, everybody wants more. So I'm okay. I was telling my wife, well, I have all these other ideas, but I better put
Mhm.
one more out with that and with that character. And so that's came out that. So I wrote that, and actually it was twice the size of this thing. But to me it felt like it was two books, so I split up the books, and in the forward of that book I kind of explain why I busted it up. We're kind of in a recession, so I figured I, instead of trying to sell one thick book, bust it up into two smaller ones and distribute those. And then later on down the road I can do bundles and stuff where you can just buy both books at the same time and give you a discount or something like that. So I published that one, and it hasn't really done very well, to be honest. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, number one, series there's a big thing in fantasy going on right now where people aren't buying series until the last book comes out. Yeah,
I could understand potentially
yeah.
why you probably because they want to see how it ends to see if it's so to see if it's a satisfying series to even
Or that you just
start to
don't
begin with.
abandon it, because
Right,
apparently,
right.
Rothfuss and George R. R. Martin started something, got a whole bunch of fans, and then it's like, they can't finish it.
Here's my theory on that. I know a lot of people have their own theories. My one, and I've never read Game of Thrones books, I'll to be honest here, and I only watched the first episode of the series. I'm not the biggest guy into medieval fantasy. I did watch that Caesar Brutus movie back in high school. That one was kind of good, I guess. I
Mhm.
watched Lord of the Rings trilogy and I watched the Hobbit movies. I'm not, I'm just not, it's not a genre I particularly care for. I mean, I watched
Mhm.
the Chronicles of Narnia movie, the remake and the original. I thought those are actually pretty good. For me, when it comes to someone like him, I think he knows it's not as good as his previous work, and he knows the landscape of the internet and the world is different back then when he used to just pump out books.
Yeah.
I think in my head, in my opinion, he knows it's not as good. He puts it out, everyone's gonna shit on it, and then it's gonna be looked at as a disappointment compared to his previous work. Because there's no way he hasn't written this book for almost about 10, 12 years. There's no way. Even you yourself said in your free time, whenever you got off work, whenever the kids were asleep, you just write. There's no
Yeah.
way someone that successful doesn't have that itch to like, man, I gotta just get in there and just write all these characters. He has. I guarantee you the book's done. He probably has a cover. It's probably printed already. He doesn't want to put it out because he knows it's not as good as his
Well,
previous work.
I also there's also other things too. I think he's happy to receive that sweet sweet HBO cash, and
That's
he
true.
doesn't
Yeah.
he doesn't have to do diddly squat for that, because in the end this is all about making money and being famous. But I could care less about fame.
He's also fat and ugly and,
Yeah.
needs to lay up the cheeseburgers, but
Anyways, uh, yeah, he's laughing
gosh.
at that,
God,
but
man.
but I think it's that, and I think
Mhm.
um it was funny because after Lord of the Rings, people were clamoring for more books from Tolkien, and it also, one of the things that Tolkien wanted to do was put together his lore and bring about the Silmarillion. But if you listen to Christopher Tolkien talk about it, he was like, his dad really wanted to do it, but he was like in his 70s and he was old, and he just didn't have the energy that he did in his youth. So that's why it ended up being Christopher Tolkien, his son, actually
Right.
putting out the
Mhm.
Silmarillion. And I think that's part of it. The guy's old, and he probably just wants to enjoy life before shuffling off this mortal coil, and just doesn't want to admit that. And it's unfortunate, but he's lighting. Number one, he's damaged a lot of fantasy fans, who are all butthurt about not finishing the series. But number two, he's sort of lighting I think he's eventually lighting a match to his. Or he's taking a match to his legacy with those books.
Mhm.
I mean, in the future, who's going to want to read those books when they never get finished?
True. Yeah. People generally like kind of getting through a series or binging it when they know there's an end.
Mhm.
Even if you know the ending of the series is not as good, or you know the series gets cut off after a certain point, you do eventually want to invest into it. Like even this is the older medieval fantasy book that I like. The son what's the one where the guy pulls the sword of the rock?
Yeah, that's the Arthurian legends.
Yeah, yeah. Like people know the ending of that book, but they
Yeah.
still read it because they know the good writing of it and the story it
Mhm.
tells. It's like who's gonna like I feel like people that have watched the Game of Thrones actual show, how many people have actually read the books? Like what's the ratio between like actual people who've read the books and watched the show versus just people who just watched the show and never read the books, you know?
I think there's it's like the Lord
Do
of the
you think
Rings.
there's some decent overlap there?
No, I think what it is it's like the Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings came about for the fans.
Yeah.
And because they knew that, well, they gambled that the fans would show up, and Tolkien has a lot of fans.
Yeah.
And so they gambled on that, and that ended up paying off. And I think it's the same thing here. Song of Ice and Fire, that whole Game of Thrones thing was very, very popular. I didn't realize how popular it was until much later. And I think a lot of people were attracted to that, fell into the HBO series because of that. And then that brought in the normies. So, like I said, same with the Iron Man. Iron Man was for the
Yeah.
Marvel nerds, and then the normies came along when it became
Yeah.
a hit, and it's the same thing, and that became a hit.
So you're saying you
But
should make a product for your fans and not call them bigots and racists. Crazy,
bingo!
whatever.
Wow, it's amazing. Yeah,
It's actually like not rocket science to not talk down the people that are willingly giving
it's
you your money.
this is fantastic concept. God, it's like the Rings of Power people. It's like, oh, you're racist. We're trying to make the Tolkien book Tolkien didn't write. No, no, no. You're just a bunch of freaking hacks.
So I'll ask you this: since I actually know you through Drink with Crazy. You
Yeah.
came and commented on the channels over here.
Hmm.
So since you've been writing for a long time, this is just usual stuff I ask writers or authors on the show because everyone's opinions and answers are going to vary. So let's start here. What do you remember what exactly inspired you to write? Like a product you watched, a movie, a book you read? What actually got you to finally just write something?
What's well, what got me to write? What got me into fantasy? This is a two-part question. What
Okay,
got me into
that's fine.
fantasy? Have you ever seen that Rankin Bass Hobbit cartoon?
The old cheesy
Yeah,
one, right? Yeah, I've
yeah,
seen a little bit of it. Yeah.
yeah. I love that thing. With with the back that came out in the '70s, and
Mhm.
that fascinating. That got me into fantasy.
Mhm.
And then when I got older, I got into Dungeons and Dragons,
Oh,
and
okay.
that lit the fire. But what got me into writing was is actually I was around my 30s,
Mm,
and I was taking business trips, and
mhm.
this is before you could do everything on your freaking phone. And so I would, if I had to fly like to California or something, I'd go buy a book and I'd read the book in the hotel room, because we'd be there for like maybe about a week. And it was something that kept you entertained. And,
Mhm.
and you go to these hotels, it's like freaking nothing on, so nothing
Yeah.
to watch. Um, so I would pick up a book and I got once, because I was kind of drawn to fantasy. I went through the whole Narnia series. I went through the
Mhm.
Lord of the Rings, read Silmarillion again, um, and the Conan stuff, Lovecraft, you name it. I was picking up a lot of the old some of the older authors. Eight, not only H.P. Lecter, H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, those guys. And I really love that stuff. I like that old time, with the language and the sort of the formal way of writing and all that other stuff. And I just absolutely loved it. And so I burned through all of that, and I started looking around for newer stuff. Tried reading some Stephen King. I could not get through one of his. I got through one of his books, and I think that was Dreamweaver, and I literally had to drag myself through that book.
So yeah, because I remember you had mentioned this. You think Stephen King is just overrated.
Yeah, I mean, so the guy can't get to the point, and take a look at this.
What's that,
It,
about 200 pages? About
yeah,
right?
it's let's see, but yeah, 230, 250 pages, somewhere in that area.
Yeah.
And that's
You
one
got any
half the book.
DEI in there? You got any black people in there?
Oh, actually, well, I wouldn't say they're black. But this has them.
He's darker shade because
Yeah.
he's Indian.
Yeah. I mean, but I'll get to that later. But anyway, so I
Mhm,
mean, it's like I tried reading it, and it's like I couldn't get past fifth chapter.
mhm,
I started picking up some other fantasy books like Robin Hobb's The
mhm,
Assassin's Apprentice. I mean, I'm like, I could never get past the fifth chapter. And it got
mhm.
to the point where I'm like, if I'm ever going to find anything, if I'm going to want to find some stuff I want to write, I'm going to have to write it myself. And, and coming from, I tried Robert Jordan. I tried the first book and it was like, this is not what I want. So, so I started writing my own stuff, and that's how I got started. And then, like I said, I tried publishing it, and my writing sucked. So I just kind of put it away. I put a lot of things away,
Mhm,
you know, and I kind of moved on to movies because
mhm.
back then we didn't have the internet, so I just couldn't go out and find books. You either had to go to a library.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, there was an Amazon, but it was not like it is today.
yeah,
And so, you went to bookstores, you looked for stuff, and you could only find what was in the bookstore. So, I mean, like all of Robert E. Howard stuff, like the Conan stuff, um, and a bunch of other. I think Krull was one of them, and Solomon Kane. You couldn't find those things unless they were actually on the bookshelves, or you had to know that they existed somewhere and in special order. Which I didn't have time. I was too busy working. But now the funny thing is now on Amazon you have all the literary world at your fingertips and then some. So that's kind of what drove me into it. Now that the technology has increased, we've got an ocean of books that you can read, but that didn't exist back then. So that's how I got into writing. And like I said, I started, I failed, I put it away, came back, you know, 15 years later and started back up again. And this is where I'm at. So, and this world that I'm writing is actually the world that I started when I wrote that book about Frankie that I tried publishing initially. So I'm still in the same world. It's something I've built in my head all these years.
okay. So the next thing I'll ask is, how do you get people interested in your work? And that, to be fair, is probably the hardest thing to do whenever you're doing like content creation, writing anything, creating any product. How have you gotten to get people interested in just actually buying and supporting your work over the years?
Um, well, first it started out with paid ads because, like I said, nobody knows you. The other thing that I did is I got into a bunch of Discord channels with what I thought um, were adjacent interests. I had read, or I remember during this time I was trying to get published. I was, investigating self-publishing, and was listening to a video like driving on my way into work about how there was this writer who got into writing um, about guns and and monsters. And so he took his love and his hobby of guns and brought it into his books about monsters, and that ended up being Monster. I would later find out it was Larry Correa and Monster Hunter Incorporated. And so I took that idea and I said, well, what would be close to fantasy? And it was comic books. Okay, if you get into a lot of these fantasy groups, it is it's it's not like the type of stuff that we're interested in. Okay, it's very politically driven. It's very culturally driven,
That's what I heard. Yeah.
and comics was more. The people in comics were more in line with the way I think. And actually being
Yeah.
at a bunch of these Comic Cons, I know for a fact that sort of realm is actually where my fans are. So
Yeah.
guys like you, guys like a bunch of the comic artists that I'm now
Mhm.
affiliated with, a lot of comic readers. There's a lot of overlap. Um,
What makes
go
you think? What makes you come to that understanding that when you're in that kind of landscape with fantasy now that it's been so politicized, like what do you think causes that now? Do you think it's because people just want to align with trying to become the New York Best Times bestseller that they're just gonna basically, have those correct talking points, or do you think it's just because everything leans so left now that people probably with your political views aren't allowed to be there?
The publishing industry is based out of New York.
Oh, you're right. Gosh,
Like
crazy.
80% of it is based out of New York. And
Could
the
you imagine, man?
agents,
Sell your soul to Kamala Harris, man, and
yeah,
you will be a New York Times best-selling author, man.
it's
Come on.
pretty you got to walk the walk and talk the talk. And it's like something like 80% female. Um and it is like 90% woke. And this is the reason why I said
Mhm,
when I went to go try and publish that one book
mhm.
the second time after the
Yeah.
rewrite, why I knew I didn't have a chance in hell is because I was looking at the agents, I was looking at the publishers, and they were saying, they were putting stuff, for was it BIPOC authors, this, that, and the other, disadvantaged groups.
Mhm.
They were looking for all that. Well, let me tell you something. That's complete BS. Okay. When I was first trying to publish, they were banging that drum 10, 15, 20 years ago, and they're still banging the drum. You got to so you're telling me that they haven't succeeded in all that time? Well, the answer is they don't want to succeed. And I'm finding authors, I'm not going to name names, but I've talked to a few authors
Mhm.
who are black authors, Hispanic
Mhm.
authors, and they want to write about white characters, and they're being told to stay in their lane.
Yeah, apparently being a white male is not it's a card game
Oh
term.
yeah, and,
It's not
and
you're not the meta right now. Being a
yeah,
straight white male is not what's
yeah,
in now.
and there's a few people who've been spilling that, and so
Mhm.
I look at it this way. You know what? I built my last career out of nothing. I can build this one out of nothing. And
Yeah.
I didn't need anybody for the last one. I ain't gonna need them for this one.
Yeah. Or that what's that one guy everyone likes? The guy that the name Sanderson,
Yeah, Brandon Sanderson.
Brandon Sanderson. He ends up always getting attacked by people. Like there was a chick a few weeks back where was attacking him saying, "Well, no one wants to buy any of my books because they're always buying Sanderson's books." It's like, man, is it really just that in the
Because
fucking
because the guy spent like I forget how many years building that fan base from nothing.
yeah? How
And
many
and
rejections did he get when he was first starting
yeah,
too? You
well,
said you
yeah, he
had
got a lot of
80.
rejections, but once he got
Yeah.
in there, he kept publishing and if you want to get into publishing, or even if you want to get into like
Mhm.
producing comic books or something, you watch his he's got podcasts, and he'll talk about some of his business philosophy and experience on those
Mhm.
podcasts. And
Mhm.
that guy is he is a savvy businessman. And that's the reason why he's pulling 40 freaking million out of Kickstarters, because the guy figured out a long time ago he can't really depend on anybody. He can't depend on his publishers. He's not going to
Yeah.
be able to depend on agents. The
Mhm.
only thing he can do is really depend upon
And
himself
that's a
and be
life lesson
prolific.
too.
Yeah,
It was the same growing up we had.
yeah,
The only person you can depend on is yourself.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
He learns it the
so
hard way. Yep.
yeah, and a
Mhm.
lot of authors think that well, I'm going to get in with this publisher and they're going to take care of me, this, that, and that's not true no more. It used to be like that, but it's not true no more. So
All she did too, since you sell through Amazon, do you actually like the sort of, let's say, money you'd make off there? Because I know it varies person to person that actually do get sales through Amazon. Do you think it's worthwhile selling your book through there for the money that you get?
mm, no, um, but the thing is when you're starting out, The big thing is getting as many books into hands of readers as you can.
Right.
Ebooks, yeah, because you get paid roughly 70% of the price of your ebook. Paperbacks, no. This guy sells for about $9. Out of that $9, I think I make less than $2 off of that. In fact, I'm pretty sure I make less than $2 off of that. And in some
That's
areas, even less than
crazy.
that. Yeah.
Ay.
I can sell that. I can sell that book through my store and make maybe 2 to 3 times that. But but number one, I'm not Amazon, and number two, nobody knows who the hell I am. So, but yeah, so the ebooks make sense going through Amazon. I mean, you the whole point is you have to get your book into markets, and you have to get it where where people can find it and pick it up. There's a lot of talk about whether you go wide or whether you just you're Amazon exclusive. I'm wide. There's advantages to being Amazon exclusive, but the more and more complaining I hear about Amazon, the more I'm beginning to think that maybe I made the right decision in the first place. My audiobooks are also wide. I don't sell exclusively through Audible. Audible takes I only get 25% of I only get 25% of the 25% of the purchase price of my audiobook on Audible. Other places like 45 to 60%.
That's hell out there. They're just
Yeah.
basically bending you over a table and just having at it.
Yeah. So it makes it very hard for me to justify justify being Amazon exclusive when they're screwing me. Now, that being said, I've been going to this year. I made it an effort to hit a lot of these like Comic Cons and mall conventions and all of that, and I'm finding that I am pushing more books out that way than I can through online.
So I'll ask you about that because I heard people say the same similar thing when they actually do go to cons, meet people, make new fans out of it. You found the experience good, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's
Mm,
been very good. My first one was a dedicated Comic Con, and I discovered quickly that that's not my space. But there's kind of like a sort of like a cross between a craft show and or like a gamer show and a Comic Con, or a craft show and a Comic Con. That's my space because even poorly, even slow ones, I'll push 10 books easily. Matter of fact, that's my minimum.
Okay.
And I've only actually done less than that at 2 events this year. One of them only had 2 customers show up, and I sold to one of them.
Hey,
Yeah,
one person is better than zero. So
yeah.
that's all I can say.
8 authors there, and only 2 people show up to buy books. So, so that was one, and the other one was the dedicated Comic Con. So I'm kind of feeling out where my market is. But yeah, I mean, the one right after one after the dedicated Comic Con, I sold out of books. I was kicking myself all the way home. I completely sold out of books. So, and this latest one that I went to, which was up in Fenton, Michigan, uh, I sold like I sold more than the last event. And I didn't think that that was a particularly, I don't want to say it wasn't really my crowd, but I was still able to sell books. And the one before that, which was in Alpena, Michigan, I almost sold out of one of my books. So, I mean,
Oh, that's awesome. Hell yeah,
yeah,
man.
and it's younger guys. I mean, it's guys like you, young guys, in high school wanting to, play Dungeons and Dragons or like comic books, and they want to read this, they want to do that.
Well,
I mean,
Dungeons and Dragons is for nerds. I'm more of a
yeah.
Giga Chad, actually. I didn't do none of that nerd stuff. I was banging chicks.
But but even so, it's that's the type of people that's the audience there. And
Yeah.
the guys are into comic books, guys are into movies, guys who like that type of stuff. That's where they're going, as far as I can tell.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just got to keep them buying.
what about the print runs for the books? Do you just
Uh,
buy that in bulk through Amazon, or you have your own printer in your
well,
own area that does
I
it?
use I use a company called Ingram Spark, and actually Ingram Spark for the paper books. This is I was in 2022. Amazon really didn't have a print business. I think you could do ebooks through them, but they didn't have print. And so the only way you could get a print book was to go through a company like Ingram Spark. There's a couple others, and so I chose Ingram Spark because a comic creator that I knew, he told me that he used Ingram Spark as well because he had something on Amazon as well. And so I use them, and I continue to use them even though Amazon prints their own. Quality's decent. They're very predictable. If I put in an order, I know I will get it within a period, with a certain period of time. Very few delays, very few, screw ups. Um, but I don't make much on those books. I do make quite a bit of money, or I wouldn't say make quite a bit. I make way more when I go to these events and sell directly.
Mhm.
Even when I eat the tax and the credit card fees, I still make more.
Damn Kamala's economy. Fucking hell.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just that. Well, Kamala's economy, I think, it's what's destroyed. I mean, this is the reason why I don't have a lot of sales. I did
Mhm,
earlier this year. I ran some ads, and my
mhm,
ads usually produce sales, and they were producing zero. And that's when I literally I've done no ad spending this year. I've done nothing but events.
mhm.
And while the events are expensive because of hotel and driving and all that other
Right.
stuff, it's getting books into hands of readers. The money comes down. The money comes later. It's getting, was Blaine Pardo told me, he was building your tribe.
So when you're getting your books done, how do you form a character? What's your basis for what a character has to be? Like your main hero. Let's just start there.
Um, well, I want to say it's partially self-insert, but it's like, I mean, like my first character, Frankie, he
Mhm,
was kind of a nerd and he was kind of like an oddball. And
mhm,
I'm very, when I grew up, I was the oddball.
mhm,
And even, for my family, school, this, that, and the other. So it started with the premise of him, it being the oddball and writing off of that. And that was a little bit, that's very natural for me, for him to write him. When I got into The Revenant and the Tomb, um, I kind of built a character out of it, but sort of he's kind of mild mannered. More, I would say more mild mannered, but more commanding and kind of, I think he's more commanding, more assertive, and sort of articulate. And that's kind of I built this background of him as
mhm.
being a son of either a wealthy merchant or a noble. Actually, he's a dispossessed noble, and worked off of that.
Yeah.
You know, everybody knows wealthy people, and everybody knows somebody who's wealthy, and everybody knows somebody who's wealthy or has old money, knows how they act.
Yes.
And then this guy, Odo, the wizard, and I'm writing another story with him as we speak. I started out with him as being once again sort of an oddball. Odo is actually an orphan.
Okay.
His character's got brown skin.
Mhm.
But
So
I
you'd
don't.
be the black son you never had,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah. There are black people in my world.
Freaking hell. Herman's DEI.
Yeah.
He got consulted. We
Well,
heard it
no,
here.
and no. When you create a world,
Yeah.
you're going to have different cultures, different races, stuff like
Oh,
that.
for
And
sure. Yeah. Mhm,
I want to live and breathe.
mhm,
So, and this one I would kind of call him Indian. Okay, not I really haven't kind of like fully formed the culture, but that's kind of where I'm going. But he's an orphan. Showed up at the wizard's gate when he was like maybe 2 years old, and the wizard took him in and raised him. And so he's always felt out of place because wizard's white, all of his staff is white. Even though they're his family, he knows he's different. I mean, he can't escape it. And this actually was a reflection of my life because I've said it before, but not a lot of people understand it. I'm autistic. I'm pretty sure I'm autistic, and this is I probably had it even before it was diagnosed. My son, my oldest son, is diagnosed with Asperger's. I only the reason why I even say it is because he and I think almost exactly alike, and I'm able to understand him,
Mhm.
and I was able to kind of guide him through school. But he's been formally diagnosed as having Asperger's, so that's it's a high functioning autism. And but because of that, I always felt the oddball in my family, and that character sort of represents that that part of me that didn't fit into the world. Didn't fit into the world that he knew. And so I used that, except I changed, the autism into something that was more visible, something easier for people to understand, which is, being of a different culture or being of a different, let's say if you got black hair and everybody in your family's blonde, you're gonna know you don't fit. Stuff like that. And so I was able to take some of those things that I felt when I was growing up and put them into that character, but in something that was easy for people to understand. Because I actually got another story somewhere that I wrote, which is about a an autistic character. And the fact is, if I'm going to publish that story, I have to rewrite it because nobody will understand it. I was reading it myself, like, going, "This thing sucks," because nobody's going to understand what that character is like. They're
Mhm.
not going to. It's not going to fit, and people aren't going to pick it up and understand it. So something that's a little bit easier for people to understand is kind of the direction you need to go. And so, and it starts, and he's a very bookish kid, which I really wasn't. But he's a very bookish kid, and he has to go on this adventure. He's kind of thrown into the wild. I don't want to say thrown into the wild, but he's thrown into this adventure where he kind of has to find his own way. And at the very end, he makes a decision about his life after all the ordeals that he's gone through. And I actually like, my the book everybody likes is the Revenant in the Tomb. My favorite is actually the Wizard's Stone
Mhm.
because and part of it's part of me, but I think that it has more depth, I think, than the other books that I've written.
What about a female character in your books? How do you go about writing your female characters?
I look at women around me that I've known. I do have some female characters, but they're not main characters. I tend to stick with male main
Yeah,
characters because guy.
yeah.
But like Herodine is a Herodine is a sort of a huntress, and she's kind of the aggressive type,
Mhm.
and she has I wouldn't say a chip on her shoulder, but she's very intense. That's in the she shows up in the Revenant and the Tomb and the Revenant and the Cult, and she's kind of a fixture with Hal Cedric. She's sort of like Hal Cedric's buddy, and she's very skilled at what she does. She's an Alani, which is kind of like my elves. She's immortal, and she's very, very good at what she does. She knows how to, she knows the wilderness, this, that, and the other, and she has like a burning a hole in her life that she really can't fill. And I kind of touch on that in the Revenant, the first book of the Revenant and the Cult. So, but yeah, I do write them from that aspect, and I write by and large, I write characters that sort of stand out, you know.
Mhm.
So if you're gonna write a character and you're gonna make a decent character, you're gonna want to write them so that there's something that grabs somebody's attention.
Mhm.
So no marshmallows. You're gonna you're gonna walk right over the marshmallows and ignore them.
Oh gosh. What about villains, actually? How do you create antagonists for your stories generally?
Um, I look at people I hate.
It's probably the all right. I get it. I
I
like
try to with a
it.
lot of with a lot of my stuff, although I do have other villains, but stuff I haven't published. In a lot of my stuff, I try to stick to the more Tolkien style of or
Mhm.
Tolkien idea of, Sauron. You never saw Sauron. You never actually heard Sauron. You always heard of Sauron. You knew he was a big freaking eye in a tower, that sort of thing. But the villains are sort of remote and distant, and it's because what my books, what all these books in this world revolve around is sort of we talk about a spiritual war of God and devils and demons and angels, this, that, and the other, but it's always sort of in the spiritual realm. Well, this is that war in real time in the flesh.
Yeah.
And so those things, these things are going to be kind of distant from other people. So the big baddies are going to be real big baddies, and you really don't see them too much.
What else? The other one is, how do you deal with pacing in your book? Actually.
Um, well, basically, in every chapter, number
Mhm.
one, I keep my chapters short, probably about
Okay.
2,000, 2,500 words or less,
Okay.
so that they're easy to get through. And I try to keep them such that, or I should say, I'm a big guy where if it doesn't need to be in the book, it's not going to be in the book.
Mhm.
So you get rid of anything that's just fluff, and that results in a much smaller book. There's not a lot of introspection. I do include some chapters of introspection. I think moves the story forward, but by and large, if it don't need to be there, it's not going to be there. I'm not going to produce big honking books, but you know what? I'd rather produce a book that I know people are going to breeze through and enjoy and not feel like it's a chore to get through than
Mhm.
to one of those big old honking things. So the thing is you gotta. I try to get them with some sort of action in the first few chapters, and then whatever goes on after that, the introspection or travel. I try to make sure that there's more, that it's kind of like different notes all through the book and building up to a finale.
Okay. Gamer Chick asks you, how would you write an anti-villain?
Is it an anti-villain the good guy?
Technically, good and bad, or how? I'll phrase it like
Maybe.
this: how would you write a situational hero? You know how like you have characters that can be villains, but sometimes depending on the situation, they'll be a good guy.
I
If
don't
you
know.
were
I haven't.
experienced writing that,
No, I haven't written anything like that.
Mhm.
I do have one, and he is a character in that Frankie book that I haven't published. Who you kind of throw in little bits to sort of humanize him. The guy's written to be a complete asshole. But every now and again, there's understandable bits of why he needs to be that way, and you sort of show that to sort of humanize him. But in the end, he's still an asshole. Pardon my French.
all right, fine. What else is there? It's usually all the author questions I usually ask: characters, pacing, writing, dialogue. How do you go about dialogue with the characters?
Once again, if it doesn't need to be in there, it doesn't happen. I don't care if I have a chapter with no dialogue. If everything that needs to be in there is in there. As far as
Okay.
dialogue goes, you kind of like, it's kind of like candy coating something.
Mhm.
You have the dialogue that leads into the thing that you want to talk about. So you kind of like, you wrapper the stuff you want to talk about by putting in some stuff that sort of leads you there. You talk about the stuff, you kind of take them in a different direction, and then you come back again. And then once you've gotten out what you need to get out, then you want to end the conversation or end the chapter.
Mhm.
So you don't have dialogue just to have dialogue. And the last thing you want to do, and one of the last things I try to do, is try to do world building in dialogue.
Yes.
I'll give you a prime example. Um, in I was thinking, what is it? Not Iron Flame, but Fourth Wing.
Mhm.
Me and a bunch of other guys that like the drink with crazy crowd. I don't know
Yeah.
if you know the Ultima Kahuna.
Yeah.
You heard it?
That's yeah. Yeah. I remember. Yeah.
Ultimate Kahuna's aunt gave him Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, and so the group that I was kind of in, we were going to all read that and then have a show about it. I couldn't get past chapter 5. My head was going to frickin' explode. But in Fourth Wing, there's this part where the main character has to make it across this parapet to something, and to get to the other side. And it's very dangerous. And if she doesn't concentrate, she falls to her doom.
Mhm.
Okay. And so what she starts doing is she starts reciting all the different things, all the different countries of the world, and how they, and what they produce as the way to kind of like keep her mind off of the fact that she's going to die, which is the worst thing you want to do, because one of the things you want to do is you want to concentrate on not falling off that narrow ledge or whatever in the hell it is you're walking on.
Mhm.
So that's number one. You kind of stick to what the character's trying to do. Number two, she threw in all this stuff about the lore of the world, all the different nations in this section, and it looks like you're trying to explain the world through dialogue. Okay. It looks like one of those, well, as you know, Bob, type situations. You say, well, as you know, Bob, and then you start explaining the thing that Bob already knows in dialogue. That's the crap you want to avoid. It looks like you're trying to explain it. So you try and make it subtle, and you don't try to explain too much. I mean, you highlight core little bits and pieces of your world, but you don't try to explain it all or try to lay everything out in one section or not. If it doesn't need to be there, then you can have the map, but if it doesn't need to be there, don't put it there. Figure out another way. It actually would have been better if she would have just in as like an aside note done an
Yeah.
info dump at a later chapter, and it would have actually flowed a lot better. So
Gamer Chick
that's
wanted to ask you: Have you ever just flipped a coin to determine the actions of a character?
no,
What? You a
no,
betting lady or something? Might just take her ass to Vegas or something.
no,
She said,
no. Actually, what I do is I always try to. The one thing I always do is I never try to make the character fit the book. I always try to make the book fit the character,
"How do
or
you
the story
avoid
fit the
using the
character.
word said too much when writing dialogue with multiple characters?" Oh yeah, there's like common words people always
Yeah.
use to get like a little repetitive.
Do
Okay.
the thing that they tell you not to do and use dialogue tags. So, and let me tell you something.
Hmm.
When you do an audiobook, set is your worst enemy, because i- if you don't do things like when you say somebody says something, and you'd say something like answered Bob, or grimaced George, or whatever. The doing the dialogue tags with the different emotions after them, that sounds way more natural in an audiobook than having to use the word said everywhere. You try using the word said everywhere, you're going to have people wanting to put their fist through the frickin' phone listening to this damn audiobook, because it said. See a saids. So, but yeah, the little things like explaining the tone when they say something, using answered, replied, um, interrupting, exclaiming,
Mhm.
stuff like that. Mix it up. Don't try and don't. It's like food. Not everybody wants the same. Not everybody wants pizza every day of the week. You kind of want to have you want to have your writing has to be varied.
Yeah. All right. So last few things I'll ask you, man, before we head out of here, which was
Mhm.
great conversation. It was awesome to have you on for the first time, talk to you. First thing is, do you have anything planned coming up in 2024, going into 2025 that you want to let the audience know about?
Well, Christmas shows up. I'm going to get drunk.
Oh gosh.
Um,
Outside of that,
yeah. I got a hip replacement coming up.
you have a hip
Uh,
replacement. Are you dying? What?
no,
You're old now at this point? Everything's
well,
falling apart?
dude, I'm pushing 60, dude.
Oh my god. That's the new 30. What are you talking about? Oh
Yeah,
my
well,
god.
the hip's still saying it's the new 80. So yeah, I got to get a hip replacement soon. I'm done doing live events for the year, so at least I hope. So I don't have any events coming up. I will probably be on. I will probably be on. I think Blasters and Blades podcast uh, in November, talking about Christian fiction, because technically my stuff's considered Christian fiction.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I don't really have anything planned. Every now and again I'll show up on a drink with Crazy to annoy the crap out of Royce.
Oh, it's always fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm just be working on my next book, and I also put out videos. So I have my the Lore Forge, Herman P. Hunter's The Lore Forge.
Okay.
So I have that in I put out videos periodically, and I've been wholly remiss in not doing videos. But then again, been in the middle of editing. I got the audiobook coming up, so
yeah. Would you and you would consider yourself an indie author, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, completely
Okay.
self-pub. So starting February, I'm going to be doing my push for the second book in the Revenant and the Cult series. So that's when I start. That's when I start, hitting all the shows and putting out the ads and all that other stuff. So that's when I come out. That's when the groundhog. That's when the groundhog comes out of the hole.
Well, last question I have for you, man. Is there any shout outs you want to give to anyone in particular, and any other closing thoughts and statements you have before we end the show?
Yeah, Beard of Darkness. I'm freaking having brain farts. Drink with Crazy. I'm on Micah Miller's live stream every Wednesday called Drawn
Okay.
and Quartered. I'm also on the fan edition, co-host in the fan edition called Drawn and Quartered Ultimate Fan Edition, which is actually where I find a lot of the artists for these bookmarks that I produce. When I go to these events, every book gets a bookmark, and I have different artists producing them. This is very
bookmarks are so underrated because I will probably be needing them more when I read more longer form stuff. I'm gonna have to take a break and reset my brain.
And John Douglas, I love John Douglas's stuff.
John, Black Crown author. Yeah, I like John. Yeah.
So, and of course and thank you for having me on, dude.
Anytime, man. Yeah, there's other stuff we got to talk about, next time you come on for a second appearance, but I'll let your body get refixed up by our
actually, system. I think that's going to be in the summer, because I don't know if I want to be doing that in the middle of winter.
Good Lord. So thank you guys for checking out this episode of the MSK Show. We will see you guys later. Have a great night, buddy. See you guys later. Deuce.